Alright, I'm going to release an update for Electroforming to keep you up to date. So it's very important that, let's say for example, that I have a whole bunch of videos on YouTube. If you've been watching some of the older content, you need to watch some of the newer content and then kind of ignore the older content. It's still useful, but I notice a lot of people like in like Facebook forums, once in a while I'll see kind of like one of my older recipes pop up from one of my videos, and all that stuff is now sort of pseudo commercialized as far as like, you know, I sell the recipes, the good recipe on firstdensitymaterial.com. So if anybody ever posts a recipe, it's probably one of my older ones correlating to a video. So I would not use that. The newer recipes are so much better. And anything that comes out of the class that you might have took at firstdensitymaterial.com, that's completely up to date. So, but what changes every once in a while is, you know, like how this all goes down. Like, what have I learned now that I'm doing larger things? I'm doing things that are 3D printed. They're huge. They're absolutely huge. Plus, I'm trying to do things for events and consignment work too. So you can imagine, like, it gets a little hairy sometimes when it comes down to it because copper only forms so fast. So I'm going to share with you some of the changes that I've made in my workflow now that I've had larger objects and smaller objects, and how I'm doing it at a price point where I'm not using a whole bunch of brightener, and things like, you know, like the amount of acid in your system, you know, how to like look at that. So this little video is just kind of an update to my workflow. You can use it, and then you can go back and look at the other videos if you want. And I would say the ones definitely from anything from 2019 or 2017, you know, like those things, just watch this video, you'll be fine. If you really want a class that's up to date, take the one at firstdensitymaterial.com or purchase a recipe at firstdensitymaterial.com. Alright, so larger objects that contain a whole lot of detail. This chicken foot contains a lot of detail, right? It's not that big, but let's pretend this was a lot bigger. Okay, the surface area would be huge. So when the surface area is huge and when it has a lot of detail, you must have a larger pH value. So this tank right here, out of the 4, is my only tank that has a higher pH value. It's at a 0.7 pH. I know that because I'm using this meter right here, which has lasted me about 2 years. So this is the current one I promote, and it's been 2 years, and I actually had to change the battery in it without throwing it out. So that's a good sign. pH 100. So I'll measure this one. It's at 0.7 pH, and that's really good for high amounts of detail in cracks and crevices. I wouldn't put any crystals in this. I only make a base coat, and if I do put crystals in it, I make sure that they are completely latexed over. Okay, so that's the only downside to having a pH value of 0.7 is most of your stones are accessible to that, and most of the finer stuff that's in stones will just crumble away and then contaminate your tank. So it's only a surface level or a large surface that I'm worried about with this tank. These two tanks right here, these are at a pretty low value, but the difference between these two is this one contains a lot more brightener. Okay, this is my brightener tank. I can use it for non-brightening or brightening, depending upon what amperage I'm using. So I can load this one with this Midas Electroforming by Rio Grande. I live in the United States. This is what I promote. I like this stuff. It is rather expensive, but if you do only one tank, it's not that bad. Okay. I do sell recipes for other brightening, but those are for mainly people that live outside the United States. Okay? If you don't live in the United States, you probably won't be able to get this because it contains sulfuric acid. For some reason, other countries don't like sulfuric acid. In the United States, it's readily available. You can go down to your local hardware store and just buy gallons of it. Doesn't really matter. So, that's that. When I need to brighten any of these, like when this piece is done and I need to brighten it, I'll throw it in this tank at a high amp. If it's at a low amp, it won't use your brightener. Yay. Well, so it'll just swim around in there. It won't use it up. But at a higher amp, the brightener gets used up. These two tanks over here, these contain the lowest pH I can manage. They are just for stones and stuff like that are accessible to any kind of acid, so I don't have to worry about sealing as much. So this tank right here actually contains, it's at a 1.8 pH. I only could, the whole 4 gallons of solution that I made without acid whatsoever only has 1 shot glass of acid in it. Okay, and that's battery acid. So what I did, instead of mixing it via the formula for this one, I had to do it a little bit different. I had to mix all the solution without acid, then put this pH meter in there and read it. When I put the pH meter in it, it was already at 2 pH. Okay, I wanted it at a 1.5 pH, so I just kept dosing it at microdosing until it reached a 1.5 to 1.8 pH. And it still works. I didn't add any leveling agent to it whatsoever. You can see that the copper is shiny, but it's got a little bit of texture to it, and that's what I wanted. Okay, so I wanted to get some of that texture that everybody likes. So this is kind of like my texturing tank. Only contains copper sulfate, very minimal amount of acid, no brightener whatsoever, and no leveling agent whatsoever either. So let's review. Texture tank. Low acid, good for stones, and good for anything. Brightener tank. High detail, large object tank. And I can switch between any of these. Alright, so the beauty of this system too is once you turn it down to at like 0.2 amps just to build the first surface up, they all work the same. It's only at higher amperage do things get weird. Higher amperages, texture gets weird. Okay? Higher amperages, brightener gets used. Higher amperages, this is just not a good tank for any higher amperage. This has to be really calculated to the surface area correctly anytime you get too much acid. You don't use as much anode up for these because half the time the low amounts of acid will make it so your tank don't get oversaturated as much and you don't get as much overuse of anode. So that's the beauty of it. Magnetic stirring is a thing of the past. Any video that I support on level or magnetic stirring, I would probably stay away from it. Reason why you get obscene amounts of bad texture in it. I don't like it whatsoever. So I eliminated it a long time ago, probably a year and a half. Haven't used it since. I'm all the better for it. What have I updated with? This glass rod. You can get it at any glass blowing place. It's just glass, but it's huge. So if I add brightener, all I'll do is I'll add it and then I'll stir it around a little bit. When you see things in forums like, hey, you guys should just top it with water and throw some acid in there. Don't ever do that. Don't do that. Get a pH meter. because acid does not evaporate. Okay, so you're adding something that never evaporates. Your pH is just going to crawl down, down, down to the point where it's horrible. Okay, so don't do that. And I think that's it. I think that's all my update. Still using these power supplies. These are amazing. These have not gone bad over the course of, I want to say, 4 or 5 years. These things are amazing. I do have a video on how to build the Beast one. That's for really big objects, but like skulls. Still using the rack mount filtering. Haven't filtered any of these in 2 months, and they still work really well. So it's still there, but I haven't used it. So if you're sick of filtering, yeah, just get rid of your organics. Switch over to like a 3D. Go buy a 3D printer and start 3D printing your objects rather than putting organics in your tank. And if it is a crystal that melts, keep a low acid, and you won't contaminate your tank. All clips, ABS plastic. Okay, no metal over the tank. I'm going to have to find a source for these. I do have the still file to get them 3D printed, but ABS printing is quite rare now. So I do have the file on thingiverse.com for these. Just type in electroforming clip on thingiverse.com. If you do have an ABS plastic printer, make yourself some clips. Been using that connecting method right there for smaller tubes, and this one for larger tubes. The best way to not use, or the least waste of anode, is just cut your pipe in half. Stick the whole pipe in there, flatten the top, and connect your wire. Alright, so as always, if you want to support the channel, you can do it in several ways. You could purchase a class for electroforming, both advanced or beginning. You can buy recipes and wing it. Or I have the new 3D print movement. Okay, so you can buy still files, which can be printed on any SLA type of 3D printer. They are scanned here in my lab, and you can add them into compositions. Those compositions can be very, 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 very complex, like this one right here. This is a witch's broom. So you're looking at some poplar, you're looking at some grapevine, and you're looking at some rope. And this needs to be thrown in my brightener tank, but it's got the surface, enough surface on it that it can be brightened now. But you can see how complex and how much texture. Very cool. So that is made up of, like, for example, this rope that I scanned, and these sage bark that I scanned, and these really gross sticks that I scanned and turned into 3D models. So those 3D models can be printed or purchased at firstncmaterial.com. I also have a new one. It's kind of pricey, but it's actually the device I use to scan 3D material. Okay, I have released that, and I released the plans for it and how to get the board and how to put it together and the complete instruction kit, because I only sell digital things. It's kind of thing. I only sell digital stuff. Good times. Except for when consignment stores and things like that, but There's a reason I only sell digital things. All right, so that's my update spiel on how to support the channel, and I hope you have a good one and enjoy the video.